Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the NoSilicast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever so slight Apple bias. Today is Sunday, December 29th, 2024, and this is show number 1025. And yes, I forgot to make all the jokes about 1024 last week. I can't believe I missed it. Oh well, it's just 1025. Well, next weekend, Steve and I are off to CES to bring you all the good techness that we can find out there. But that does mean we will not have a live show on January 5th. Now, your clue, if you forget, is that you'll already have an episode of the NoSilicast because I will be publishing it on Friday, the 3rd of January to keep the streak alive. Hi, my name is Allison, and I'm a liar. Before I explain why I'm saying that, I need to explain the backstory on how I learned I was a teller of untruths. I started my podcast on May 13th, 2005. When I tell people about my podcast, I usually brag by saying I've been doing it for over 19 years without missing a single week. Now, if you listen carefully, you never heard me say that right when I hit the year mark, the anniversary of the podcast. I usually wait a few months because my streak didn't actually start right out of the gate. I did 4 episodes in the first 10 days, skipped June altogether, did 2 episodes in July, missed August entirely, did 3 in September, and then it wasn't until October 2005 that I was consistently pushing out episodes every single week. But I figured that was a niggle as long as I waited until after that time to say I'd been doing it, say, in this case, for 19 years. Now, I achieved this because of the kindness of people like Bart, Alistair, and Jill from the North Woods, and a host of other friends over the years who run the show while we're on world travels. And let's not forget to thank some AI-generated voices who also help to keep the streak alive. While that's a streak to be proud of, and while I was a pioneer in podcasting, which only started in October of 2004, the NoSilicast was not the first Apple podcast. That honor goes to my friend Adam Christensen, host of the MacCast. He did his first show on December 13th, 2004, exactly 5 months before my first show. On December 13th, 2023, exactly 19 years after he started, Adam retired the MacCast and joined the Mac Geek Gab with Dave Hamilton and Pilot Pete. He's a fantastic addition, as you can imagine, to the show, and he helps keep the Mac Geek Gab at the top of my listening queue. What that means, though, is that as of May 13th, 2024, when the NoSilicast turned 19, it became the longest-running Apple podcast. I double-checked this with Adam to see if he knew maybe there was somebody who'd started a show that was still going on, and it was in between our 2 starts, but he agreed that the NoSilicast is now the longest-running Apple podcast. Now, I was playing around with ChatGPT the other day, and I asked it to name the longest-running Apple podcast. It answered, "The longest-running Apple podcast is the MacCast, which has been around since 2004. I explained patiently to ChatGPT that the MacCast is no longer running, and I repeated the question. It answered, "Got it. In that case, another long-running Apple podcast is macOS Ken, which has been delivering daily Apple news since 2005. Well, I was pretty sure my friend Ken started after me, but I double-checked over at macosken.com, and I found on his About page this paragraph. Since May of 2005, Ken Ray has eaten, slept, and breathed Apple news and news related to Apple News in order to produce a daily Apple News show. Half of 2005 was spent doing that for someone else. Since late January of 2006, he's done this under his own flag, producing the daily show macOS Ken." Well, I explained this to ChatGPT, and finally it came back with the right answer. It wrote, "My mistake. The longest-running Apple podcast that's still going would be the NoSilicast, hosted by Allison Sheridan. It started May 2005 and is still going." I have a feeling I could probably convince ChatGPT of any answer I wanted to give it, or I wanted it to give, but I was satisfied and my ego was properly stroked. But it got me to wondering, why did ChatGPT get that wrong? I rolled the question around in the back of my brain for a few weeks, and I realized I might have a clue to the answer. 100 years ago, when MP3 players had teeny tiny storage, we compressed our podcast down to 64 kilobits per second, and we were also told as podcasters to do everything possible to keep our podcast feed file small. Now, it's funny to think about that now, because it's just this little text file that makes the magic happen. But back then, every kilobyte counted. I remember at one point I had put something really big, big chunk of text into my podcast feed, and that actually broke some of the accessible players. It was bigger than the buffer they could hold. Anyway, so based on this guideline of trying to keep this feed file as small as possible, I made the decision way back then to only keep a certain number of episodes in the feed, I should say. At some point in my podcasting journey, I made the decision to start allowing all new episodes to be in the feed. But because of my earlier decision, no episodes prior to September 16, 2018 have been included in the feed. That could be why ChatGPT didn't know it was older than the others. Well, obviously, this must be rectified. So I want to get every single episode into the feed file with the correct date so that all 19 glorious years are represented. But how do I go about doing that? I started by just asking ChatGPT to do it for me. After a bit of conversation on the topic, it made it clear to me this was something I could do through WordPress. I played around with WordPress and realized I'd have to do some machinations on the earlier blog post for WordPress to be able to create the feed automatically. The problem is that the earlier podcast blog posts are not identified in any way as being podcast posts. It wasn't until January 2016 that I started having a NoSilicast category for those blog posts. If I could get all of the NoSilicast posts into the right category, I could create a feed for the category, and then I should be able to grab the first 9 years of shows in the feed file and then tack them onto the existing feed file. I don't want to replace the whole feed with the auto-generated one because I've done a lot of work to tailor the episodes in the later years, and all of that would be lost. I've done some testing, and while it's not quite working correctly yet, I think I'll be able to achieve my goal. But before I could add the old content to the current feed, I have to manually categorize every single NoSilicast post from 2005 through 2015. It was tedious, but whilst watching TV over a couple of nights, I successfully categorized a decade of blog posts as NoSilicast podcast posts. Boy, that's a lot of P's. Hard to say. All right. Now, I entitled this article, "I'm a Liar." That was partly for comedy and clickbait, but it is actually the point of this story. As I was going through the first 4 years of NoSilicast posts to add the category, I discovered something appalling. There is a gap between show 107 on July 29, 2007 and show 108 on August 19, 2007. In between those two shows, there are blog posts about how much fun I was having in Italy. Evidently, I took 2 weeks off from the show that I never accounted for in my bragging about 19 years without missing an episode. It's actually only been 17 years. Now, my only defense was that I had no memory of taking 2 weeks off, but I still hang my head in shame about this. So maybe I just won't mention it anymore or be much more kind of hand-wavy about it and then point out I do have the longest-running Apple podcast. Now, while I must live with the sham that has been my claim to fame all these years, it's actually been kind of interesting doing a walk down memory lane, going through all of the shows. I found one particularly delightful episode of the NoSilicast. On August 27th, 2008, Bart did his first stand-in on NoSilicast number 162. I'll finish this by letting you listen to the very young voice of Bart Busschots, who seems to have a stronger Irish accent than he does now. And he introduces the first Trabcast.
Hi, this is Bart Busschots and not Allison Sheridan of the NoSilicast podcast, hosted over at podfeed.com. A technology geek podcast with an ever so slight Macintosh bias. It's Sunday, the 27th of August, 2008. This is show number 162. Do you know something? I had no idea how hard it was to record an intro. I must have redone that thing about 20 times, and it still doesn't sound great compared to Allison's. So I guess practice makes perfect. Those 161 times didn't go to waste. Anyway, I'm 30 seconds in and I've already gained an awful lot of extra respect for Allison, and you're probably wondering what kind of an amateur you have hosting the show. Anyway, hopefully Allison is now sunning herself in Cancun and having a great time. Hopefully she's not worrying about what I'm doing to her precious podcast. My little thought for the day, the NoSilicast is called the NoSilicast because it's Allison backwards, most intelligent. So I guess for today, it's the Trabcast, which is Bart backwards.
I thought that was really fun to listen to so far back. That's how long we've been friends.
Physics nerd Graeme here with an update on my recording process. There's been a slew of microphone reviews recently on NoSilicast, so I thought I'd add one to the mix as I just got myself a new shotgun microphone. So first, what's the problem to be solved? I seem to like making videos and I have some job interviews coming up, so I wanted to re-evaluate my setup. I use a nice OM Systems OM5 camera in webcam mode and a condenser mic, but the problem is that the condenser mic attaches to a preamp which has its own power cable and then a USB cable to the computer. And then I have to make sure I have the right microphone selected, which is harder than you'd think in online meeting apps. So it's all a bit of a faff, and the worst part though is that my condenser mic is best when close to my mouth. But I don't want headshot video with a mic in front of my mouth, and I definitely don't want that for a job interview. I need a new microphone that is simple to use and stays off camera. I found a few YouTubers using shotgun mics, so I did some research and, thanks to a sale, settled on the Mackie EM98MS shotgun microphone. Now, the idea about a shotgun microphone is that it has a long barrel, so it looks like a stick, and that design allows it to get a very directional supercardioid envelope for the sound. In other words, it just records the sound directly in front of the microphone. The Mackie I bought is not as aggressive in this sense as others apparently, but it works for me. Another critical feature is that it is powered, meaning it has a preamp built in, and so my unedited audio is already pretty loud, reducing the need for any post-processing. This and the pro-level electronics gives really good crystal clear sound. In use, it is compact and lightweight, and it just sits on the hot shoe of my microphone. It's also got a screw thread so it can screw directly into a tripod. It plugs into the microphone port of the camera, giving me a really easy to use setup. Now that's important to me because this isn't my job. I just want to have something I can get and I can use very easily. In Zoom or whatever app I am using, I just select the camera as my source and it works. The microphone comes with 3 cables. One connects to the camera, or that one can be swapped for a similar one to connect to a computer or phone. Or the final cable, and that's the only negative I've seen. It's a USB charging cable and it does that job perfectly well, but it doesn't let you connect to the computer via USB. In other words, the output is only via 3.5mm connections, so there's no digital output. The USB charging is for the internal battery that powers the preamp, and it's rated for 25 hours. There is an additional socket on the end of the microphone to let someone use monitor headphones, which I might try out. It also has a couple of buttons, one for powering on. It's got a clever, I think, little feature that you can also press a button and it switches so that the stereo recording records the right channel with -10 dB. What that means is that by getting one recording and trying to get it nice and loud, if something was too loud, the right channel will have a quieter version of it, so you don't get any clipping artifacts. I don't think I'm ever going to use that, but we'll see. And finally, it has a couple of filters on it to cut out the rumbling, 75 Hz and 150 Hz. I've got it to 75 Hz, but got no idea about that really. In testing, I've been happy with the audio quality, with ample signal to noise ratio to allow boosting for live use or cleanup using isotope in post-production. I've done some light touching up to the audio in my spoken review, so for comparison, this sentence is my lightly edited version, whereas this sentence is amplified but not edited, and finally this sentence has no adjustments. So this microphone is not necessarily better or worse than the other microphones recently reviewed, but it is different and has its niche. I feel like my setup is giving me a professional looking picture and professional sounding audio, and hopefully this is going to help me present myself in my best light, whether it's for an interview or whether it's for one of my YouTube videos on physics shorts with Dr. Shepherd. Regarding that, I've contributed some podcast articles to NoSilicast before, so look for those if you want to know more about my process. And if you want to chat about any of this, then please come and join me and the rest of the lovely NoSilicastaways on podfeet.com/Slack.
Well, thanks so much for that great review, Graeme, and the audio sounds fantastic. I'm really glad you did those 3 comparisons so we could see that you are doing some processing to make it sound as good as you are. Now, I have to confess, I was really confused at the beginning when you said you had an OM Systems OM5 camera, because I have an Olympic OMD EM5, and this is an OM5 from OM Systems, so I had to look it up. I had no idea that Olympus had changed their branding to call them OM Systems, so there's no more OMD and all that. I know they're not maybe the top camera system these days, so hopefully they're still doing a good job and going to be able to keep cameras going. You've heard Bodie Grimm on the show a few times, and in the next NoSilicast, you'll hear him in 2 different recordings. His show, the Kilowatt Podcast, is an awesome resource for EV news and other renewable energy topics. We learned so much from him, and he's a great interviewer, and his personality only adds to the joy of listening. He is self-deprecating, and when he stumbles on saying something, he often just leaves it in the show. Well, last year, Steve got the idea to pull out clips of his silliest moments into a highlight reel, and evidently that's become an annual tradition because Steve has done it again. The clip you're about to hear was created for Bodie and played on the Kilowatt Podcast, but he agreed that we could play it here. It doesn't have anything to do with what we normally talk about in the podcast, but I thought it was so funny I wanted to play it. If this doesn't make you subscribe to Bodie's show, I don't know what will.
Hello, Kilowatt listeners. This is fan of the show, Steve Sheridan. It's that time of year to present the 49th annual Kilowatt highlight reel for your listening pleasure. This is where I assemble a collection of audio snippets from selected Kilowatt episodes throughout the year. Since you're a Kilowatt listener, you've probably come to know and love how Bodie delivers his podcast with, what should we call them? Bodieisms. These are the moments where Bodie gives us a peek into how he thinks, and it's part of his charm. To be clear, these are comments he's left in the show after editing. So what follows is a collection of Kilowatt audio clips from Bodie over the past year that I found quite amusing.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. That's my stupid fault. I forgot which podcast I was doing. I didn't stick the nail. I didn't nail the landing. I didn't stick the nail. I didn't stick the landing. I didn't stick the landing on that one. So, without further ado, is it ado? Yeah. Elon, take it over.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Tesla was actually working with Uber on where the superchargers should be located. I don't know why I said that so weird. All of these folks that talk to Inside EVs talk to them on the condition of anonymity. They wanted to be anonymous. Now let's move away from a time when I was young, hopeful, had a full head of hair, wasn't overweight. The world was my oyster at that time. Now the world is my Werther's original. I'm to that point in my life. All right, here we go. Hold on just a second. I got it. Nailed it. Some guy was like, "Hey, you suck and you stutter." And I was like, "I know." Let's move on to something more positive. Let's talk about dead puppies. No, I'm just kidding. This is coming from somebody who thinks almost everything that I do is pretty much crap. So I'm really proud of it. Just read into that projectile vomiting and using the carpet cleaner until 3 o'clock in the morning. That's my goal, is to make your family events uncomfortable and more contentious. And I want to thank everybody for sticking around to this train wreck of a show. A mediocre thank you to everybody else. I'm just kidding. Huge thank you to everybody else. I've received so much positivity and encouragement from this community, and I really just want to say thank you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please don't unsubscribe.
Okay, so I know, again, this had nothing to do with what we normally talk about here, but Steve and I thought it was too funny not to share. Well, I want to end the year by thanking the people who support the NoSilicast through Patreon. I think it's great. People can do one-off donations, and that works for a lot of folks. The people at Patreon are there for me through thick and thin through these monthly pledges. It's kind of like having scheduled backups as compared to doing a backup when you get around to it. Now, I'm not throwing shade on whatever method works for you, but the Patreon supporters do have a special place in my heart. If you'd like to not have to worry your pretty little head about whether it's time to donate again, head on over to podfeed.com/Patreon and pledge your support. Well, hi, Bart. Welcome to the show. We're going to have a little bit of a different topic today. Is that right?
We are, because while I am perfectly capable of stringing a sentence together today, I can't put multiple of them in the right order very well because I had a little bit of, what are we calling it, a minor medical procedure yesterday, and I'm on painkillers I'm not used to.
So there's painkillers you are used to?
Not really, no. An aspirin, does that count?
Okay. Well, so Bart was going to do a programming by stealth, but that we are definitely not in the realm of capabilities of that. And so I'm going to maybe do a little more directing of the conversation in case Bart wanders off here. But you had a recent opportunity to talk to some college students to try to give them an idea of what a cybersecurity specialist does. And it sounded like a really interesting topic for us to have as an audio recording, which you can also point to. So if people are interested in pursuing this kind of career, what is it really like? What does it mean? Is that a good way of starting us out?
It is. And so I guess for a little more context, so these students are halfway through their secondary education. So in Ireland, we break, so you have like the equivalent of your lowest school, and then at about age 12, you go into secondary school here. And halfway through, you have to make decisions. You have to choose, because you do way more subjects for the first half than the second half, and you have to choose what do you throw away.
So hang on. So this is not university or college or whatever words you want to use there. This is still what we would call high school.
Yes, this is halfway through high school, so age 15-ish.
Oh, okay. So you're getting them young.
Right. And so these students have the choice to take a year between the two halves. And in that year, they're physically in school, but they have no classes. They do project work, they do work experience. So they're encouraged to be a part of the community. And if they think they're interested in a line of anything, they have to find work placement for themselves with the help of their teacher who guides them as a mentor. And so we had a bunch of them with us in IT services. So they're all 15-year-olds who think IT might be something they're interested in, but they have no real idea because they're 15. So they found a place who would take them in for a few weeks to give them an experience of the real world.
Wow, that's really cool. We try to wait until somebody's, 22 years old, gets out of college with a degree in that subject, and then they find out they don't like it.
Right, yeah. So, I think it's great. And so obviously the students are well motivated because they're here because they want to understand what it's really like, not just what it says in their textbook. And so a lot of us in the department volunteered to chime in. And I was asked if I could give, I think it was 45 minutes I was asked to have a conversation. And, there was only a few of them. And the idea was a conversation, not a lecture. Now, I don't like to go into anything unprepared. You may have noticed that. So I prepared a slide deck, which was never intended to be presented as a lecture. It was only ever intended to be on in the background because our smallest meeting room is quite cozy, but it does have a very impressive television. And so you sort of put it on in the background and then we can look at it. And sometimes if we have to refresh our memory about something, we can look at it, but it's not guiding the conversation. It's just, prompts.
Okay.
And we just had a chat. And I remember while I was doing it thinking, I think A, I'd like to talk to Allison about this, and B, there is a shortage of people in cybersecurity, and we're not going to need less of them. That's the one thing I'm certain of. And so if you are making decisions about your future and you're looking for a career where you're not afraid it's going to disappear in a week because AI is going to take your job, you could do worse than get into cybersecurity. And I also think it's hilarious that I have never in my entire life had a job that my mother understands. And cybersecurity specialist didn't help. Going from sysadmin to cybersecurity specialist didn't make that better because...
Oh, you just need to be better at explaining it to her. She's smart.
I mean, she is, but I'm also not entirely sure she's as motivated to care as the students I was talking to were. Do you enjoy it? Yes. Okay.
Well, I liken to this when, you ask a little kid, what does mommy or daddy do? And the answers are often quite humorous, even though you've tried to explain it to them, right?
Yeah, they wear a suit. Oh, yeah. In my case, I got so wrong. So my dad is an electrical engineer who worked in a factory making transformers. I liked cartoons. What do you think I thought my dad made? It was not boxes that change high voltage to low voltage. I can tell you that.
Well, my dad was an engineer, and all my friends would always say, oh, he runs a train. No.
A fire engine, silly.
Right. We had Take Your Child to Work Day, and Kyle, my son, is one of the snottiest but funniest people I know. And after spending the day with me at work, he wrote in Spanish, because my daughter Lindsay had written in Spanish on my whiteboard the year before, something quite nice. What he wrote in Spanish was, all my mother does is talk, talk, talk. And I asked him what he meant, and he said, well, you didn't make anything. And he thought I made things. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was right. As a manager of sysadmins, I didn't produce anything. And I said, well, I write emails and I make PowerPoint presentation. He goes, that's just talking with your fingers, Mom. And I realized he was right. All I did was talk, talk, talk for like the last, decade of my career.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you talk the right way, things do get done.
Right. It just wasn't me.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so
directly.
Bart, what does a cybersecurity specialist do?
So I spent a long time trying to figure out how to summarize it, and I ended up writing it down as names of words with emojis. Because I sort of thought, okay, I come in the morning on Monday, and then I leave on Friday. What do I do between those two things? And everyone assumes I spend all of my time looking at some sort of a black screen with green text and fighting hackers. That's what everyone thinks a cybersecurity specialist does. So it is true that reacting to incidents is absolutely part of my job, right? There are things that go beep, and when they go beep, someone has to go and look at them. Most of the time, thank goodness, they go beep because nothing has actually gone wrong, or it's because something's starting to go wrong. But if you get in there quick enough, you can stop it doing major damage. And a lot of systems are here to help us these days. So it's really interesting how the amount of damage done before something goes bing is so much less now than it was 2 years ago.
Because you've been doing a good job setting things up then.
Arguably, because one of the things I have been involved heavily with is pushing multi-factor authentication for everybody. Everybody. And that has made the single biggest difference of anything that has changed in IT in the last decade. Just
Let me interrupt
multi-factor.
you to tell people something that they might not know, or to get you to tell them, is I always thought, oh, isn't that cute? Bart works at this little tiny university in Ireland. I mean, how many users can he have? Like 150? How many people, if you count all of the students and all of the professors, how many people are we talking about?
In terms of identities, i.e. accounts, you're talking approximately 30,000.
That's as big as my global corporation I worked for Raytheon was 30,000 people. That is insane.
Yeah, because if you're a part-time student, you get a full account, right? There's no such thing as a half account. You have an account or you don't have an account. If you give one lecture a month as a visiting lecturer, you have an account. You have an identity. You are here. You can be attacked, right? So everyone who's involved with the university has an identity. So in terms of how many identities there are out there where we could be attacked by, it's tens of thousands.
That's crazy. I'm really glad you told me that at one point, because I was kind of like, oh, I've seen the university. It's not that big. I mean, it's
physically,
it's a good size, but it's not this monstrous facility, you know?
Yeah, I can walk from one end to the other quite comfortably and do quite often.
Right. Okay, so you respond to possible incidents when things go beep.
Yes. Now, here's where there's a really important point here, right? Because what's going beep, a lot of what's going beep is the thing people think I do is something almost everyone outsources because almost no one is big enough to do it themselves. It's a Security Operations Center, a SOC. So there are people whose job it is to watch in real time what's going on and to respond. And that's really difficult. And that, like, you would need at least 3 or 4 full-time people for an organization of our size. And the skill level you need to continue to fine-tune the tools used in a security operations center they're very skilled professionals. So we couldn't afford that. So that's outsourced. So you buy security operations center as a service. So like you can get malware as a service, you can get 24/7 eyes on your systems as a service. And
you said you're reacting to alerts and monitor and responding and monitoring, but it sounds like somebody else is doing that.
They're doing the 24/7, and their expertise is filtering. It's like the world's biggest funnel. So every event that happens is an event, right? Someone's opened a file, someone's logged in, someone's sent an email, someone's forwarded an email, someone's replied to an email. They're all events, millions of them, and they all go into the big end of the funnel. And then there's a whole bunch of AI that crunches through all that data and goes, well, that's weird. That's not normal.
Looking for something out of pattern.
Something out of pattern. Then there's a whole bunch of rules written by those very intelligent humans we outsource to, and they write patterns of known malware. It is known that this is an attack. It looks like this. It is known that this is an attack, and they update that many times a day. So that's chunking away at those millions, and that gets it down to thousands. And then those thousands go through more clever algorithms, and that gets it down to hundreds. And then the human beings who are not us look at those hundreds, and they filter that down to 3 or 4. And those 3 or 4 go bing for me.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I get why that would be much more efficient to have an outsourcing company do that because they're doing it for so many people. All right.
Yes.
So are we past the first bullet now? Next is monitor?
Next is monitor. So one of the most important things to know is what is normal. That is, if you don't know what one of your systems is supposed to look like, the chances of you spotting the start of something bad is about 0. If you look at a dashboard and you can't say, normal, a little bit busy today, oh, that's odd, right? If you can't say, oh, that's odd, something wrong. So a big part of my week is effectively like a physical security person patrols. I have a whole bunch of dashboards, and to make sure that it gets done consistently, there is a run book I follow. Literally, it's the weekly baseline security checks is the name of the run book. And that is a list of tasks. And there is a matching note, or one note, in fact, every week a new page is started and the log is taken of the baseline checks. And every week we go through the steps and we record, yeah, I did it. And what was different? Sometimes the answer is, no, all looks fine. Almost never do you find nothing, right? In theory, every single server automatically patches itself every 24 hours. In theory. In reality, when you look at the dashboard, you see that there is a server there with a patch level of -5 days. It's like, why are you 5 times worse than you should be? What's going on here?
Okay. So is part of that knowing what normal looks like? Like you now know what normal looks like so you can recognize abnormal?
Yeah, it's a simple question. Like, okay, so you're currently having 500 users log in every minute. Is that normal? Yes. You're currently having 5,000 login attempts. Is that normal? No.
Okay.
What's going on here? Brute force attack. Nowadays, it's almost always password reuse, so-called password stuffing. There has been another data breach. I'm sure there has. I don't even know which one it is. I promise you there has.
It just happened.
It just happened. Guarantee you. Whenever you're listening to this, doesn't matter. It's true.
Right.
And they are taking those passwords and they are trying them.
Okay.
And so what you will see is a spike of failed logins. Or actually, no, what you will see is a spike of successful denied logins.
Okay.
Correct username, correct password, multi-factor failed. Correct username, correct password, multi-factor failed.
Wow. Okay, and that's a success, but you still want to stop it. But I'm going to stop you here for a second. I have to be amazed when you talk about every server is patching itself every day, and if something's 5 days out, that's a catastrophe. I distinctly remember when my sysadmins asked me to beg our customers to let us upgrade Oracle once every 3 months. Beg our customers, and they said no. Not my systems. No, they're critical. They can't be offline for even a minute. I can't take the risk that it's going to change the software in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on here. One of them is good tooling. So modern Linux can change the kernel while the OS is running.
Ooh.
That is like changing your tire while you're driving up the highway.
Yeah.
It is astonishing technology. It's called hot patching. It's coming to Windows 2005, by the way. So Windows Server 2025 is going to be as powerful as Linux is now. So that's good news for all the Windows E server people. But that means that you can apply those updates without rebooting. That means no downtime. Wow. And then the other thing is an enterprise. What's different about enterprise Linux versus desktop Linux? The answer is on enterprise Linux, the version number of everything is locked. So you will have Apache 2 point whatever for the entire lifetime of Red Hat Enterprise 8 or Red Hat Enterprise 9. Mm-hmm. And the only thing they will do is bug fixes and security updates. You will stay at that version of Apache with all of its behavior for the entire life of that version of Red Hat. And they will just make sure it's not insecure. And so those patches you're applying won't change something out from under you because they can't. That's an upgrade, not an update. So if your version of WordPress says, well, I need PHP 8 now, and that version of WordPress or that version of Red Hat came with PHP 7, you have to manually log in and go, upgrade PHP 8 whatever. And then you'll get those changes. So you won't get the breaking changes from auto updates on an enterprise product. That's what makes it enterprise.
Okay, let's get back on topic here. I've driven you off the road with your wheels changing while you're driving. So we've done respond and monitor, and then next is check.
Check is really important. So you have to, by law, make all sorts of commitments to auditors, or there are commitments made for you, right? We work under regulations that say every public body must meet a minimum standard that is X. It's a bit like NIST. So in America, if you're a government contractor, you have to meet the NIST standard. Ireland has an equivalent of that for anyone who gets taxpayers' money. If we are giving the hard-earned money of the Irish taxpayer to you, you in response must do the bare minimum not to be hacked to be Jesus. That is a condition of getting that money.
Okay.
So you have to commit to certain patch levels. You have to commit to certain rules, and you are audited, which means it's not okay to say, oh, our policy is. That does not get you past an audit. They will say to you, okay, fine. Prove, which means you have to check every assumption. I assume everything is at a certain patch level. Is it? Better run a script. That script had better write to a log file, and that log file had better be dated, and you better have the full history of that script going back. If your processes you check weekly, you better have weekly CSV files, right? If you say, we guarantee that every service does a certain thing, that we have a firewall on every server. Well, log into every server and make sure it hasn't crashed. Has your firewall crashed? You'd be amazed how often actually the process can die. Firewall D can just die.
You said you've got a script that runs that checks all this, and then it writes out a CSV, and you've got that. But are you then looking at that CSV and reading it, or what do you have? Yeah. What does the security specialist do with that?
So for a start, you have to write a lot of those scripts because none of these things are static. So you are making every year. An auditor's job is not to be your enemy. An auditor's job, your auditor is your best friend. This took me a while to comprehend that, because you think, auditors, they're the baddies, but they're not. They're your complete friend.
They're terrible.
And if they're good auditors, they will end with, okay, you've passed. You said you did X and you did X. That's great. But if you did Y, you'd be more secure. So can you make us some new promises so that when we come back next year, we can audit you against those enhanced promises? Or
Okay.
the less friendly version of that is you have cyber insurance. And every year they ratchet the screws a little bit because they're more and more afraid of how much money you could cost if something goes terribly, horribly wrong. And the baddies aren't sitting still. So every year, the minimum standard for your premium not to go up goes up a little.
Okay, so you're running the scripts and you're writing the scripts. Are you looking at the results of the scripts?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That is a big part of our processes, weekly reviews of...
That sounds boring.
You would imagine it would be, but it's usually where mysteries come from. Mysteries are...
Oh, okay. The
fun.
puzzle part. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of puzzling going on. And a lot of the time, like there is... A university is a very open place, right? You lived your career in an enterprise where IT had a lot more power than IT in a university do. Because in a corporation, the employee, hypothetical, especially in a modern corporation, corporate IT can say to an employee, no, you'd like to go
It
to
was
PayPal.
on the path to get there, Bart. It was on the path to get there, much to the consternation of every employee, by the way.
Okay, well, in this day and age, if you worked in enterprise, it would just be no. These websites, no. Facebook, no.
Yeah, it
Not
was
allowed.
getting there. Yeah. What's this got to do with the check?
What it's got to do with the check is one of the least favorite words for every university IT person. Why you have to check. What those mysteries prove to be almost every time. The answer is almost always the same. So academics have academic freedom. They use that academic freedom for what we call shadow IT.
Mm-hmm.
They invent their own solutions to things.
Yes.
And they very often do not do so in an even vaguely secure way. And we are responsible for the entire IT footprint of the university. It doesn't matter who stamped the footprint in the sand. It's still our problem. So a lot of the time when you check assumptions, you find there is an unknown unknown. It's like, what? What is this?
That's interesting and kind of fun to solve the puzzle.
Challenging, yeah. It's certainly one of the parts of the job that is the opposite of boring, right? You're saying, oh yeah, just looking at outputs of scripts is boring. No, they almost always involve a mystery. The other thing that you will see is you get to know the shape of what the baddies are doing. You get to... I say, oh, trying that little trick again, are we? Oh, I've seen that before, right? At the moment, the classic one, right? The pattern I see all the time, username and password correct, multi-factor authentication denied, location, India. Same thing, location, always Missouri for some reason. Same thing, location, Amsterdam. Okay, distributed. They're just trying on a few different proxies. They're trying to see if you're doing conditional access based on location. You recognize it straight away. You force change the password because it's password reuse. The baddies have the password. Sorry, user, you can't have that password anymore. You let it go. Gone now. That password's not allowed. Change it. Problem goes away. And so you recognize them. But then you get a pattern that you don't recognize. And then you're like, okay, something's gone wrong here. There is someone logged into this account who shouldn't be, and they didn't get in through any of the ways I've seen before. How did they get here? Step 1, lock it down, kick them out. Great. Step 2, how? There was a door somewhere that a horse bolted through. You haven't closed it yet.
Oh, okay. Right.
How?
You got that horse out, but...
Right. What do I do to stop that happening again? And if you can't answer... Okay, great. An account was compromised. You figured out what the baddies got. You locked it down. You detected whether or not there was a data breach. You've done all of your homework. Your manager isn't happy yet. Because your manager's next question is, and so how are we going to stop that happening to the president's account? What happened? What went wrong here? And then you are into the audit logs. And then you realize just how much logging there exists in the universe. And then your skills at data manipulation, your skills at languages like KQL, the cluster query language for breaking down into the logs, really come into it. And you will discover a new technique that's new to you. The chances are it'll then become really common because the baddies copy from each other all the time. And it will be a new normal. And it will become your new best friend. And you will tweak some knobs and you will tweak some things. And you will start to see, and we blocked that one, and we blocked that one.
I've had my hand up for a long time, so this is going to sound like I just came out of nowhere on this, but back when you're talking about the typical things where you find something interesting that you didn't expect to see, I remember our IT security finding somebody who had a rogue Wi-Fi access point, and it turned out to be the physical security people, which was comedically enjoyable. Yeah. Anyway,
yes, that is not unheard of. That is not unheard of.
Are we ready for maintain?
I think so. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So you can be if you have defenses in place for every attack you know about, you may think, oh, we're done here, but you're not. Because like I said, when you're doing your check and your measure, you're going to find new things that didn't exist yesterday, new vulnerabilities that didn't exist yesterday. So the defenses you have, it's like a car. You can't just set it up and then drive for infinity.
So this is changing the oil.
Yeah, you have to keep everything running at its best, because what it means to be running at its best is always changing a little. It's not, sometimes it changes really quickly, but most of the time it's evolving. But if you don't keep up with it, it is not long until your amazing defenses are awful. So you are constantly tweaking and tuning, and the check feeds into the maintain a lot, because that's going to tell you where things aren't going great. And then you've got to ask yourself, okay, well, what dial can I twiddle? Right? What can I do to address this measured shortcoming? Right? I have a fact here that this is where we are not good. How do I make us improve that fact? Maybe it's buy a new product. Usually, though, it is change a policy. Some sort of a policy somewhere. That then involves change control and a lot of negotiation, because maybe that policy is a balance. If not maybe, almost certainly. That policy is a balance between a risk and a reward. It makes something we like easier or possible at all, but it also makes something we don't like easier or possible, and you may have to rebalance, and then you're into change control and you're into putting your diplomatic hat on. I have to wear my diplomatic hat a lot. I think that.
Yeah, I'm starting to think there a third slide you could present someday is what are the characteristics of my personality that make this a good fit for me, right? That's another vector to the same thing. Is what is it because you like a puzzle, because you like writing scripts to solve problems. What are those things about you? We don't have time for that today, unfortunately, but I think that's a whole nother part of it, because that would speak to the students too, to say, am I that kind of person, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The other very much related thing is you always have to be learning. So you can't ever assume that you know everything, because you can't, because by tomorrow there's something new. And so you're always curious, you're always keeping your ear to the ground, you are reading the news sites, you are getting information from wherever you can to know about what the trends are, what's new in terms of risks, what's new in terms of technologies. You're just learning. You're
That's
hoovering
the easiest one for you, right?
Yeah, naturally curious is definitely a good quality, a personality feature. The other thing is you are always enhancing. Security, perfect security is plug everything out, encase it in concrete, and throw it in the river. That's perfect security. Anything less than that is imperfect. There is always room for improvement. You are always finding ways to enhance. And because of the concept like academic freedom, engagement is spectacularly important. So engagement for me is with my colleagues in IT services, with my colleagues in other departments who have technical people, with the university staff as a whole, with the university staff, students and admins, with my opposite numbers in other universities, with the Irish national bodies like the National Cybersecurity Centre, those kind of people, and with corporations. We have vendors. Those vendors know things. Those vendors, the things they know, maybe I need to know. I spend a lot of time, and the other way around too, by the way, things I know that our vendors should know as well, right? It's an engagement is very much two-way, right? What should they expect from us? What may be totally normal for another client, if that happens from us, that's a sign we have a really big problem. So if we don't engage with the vendor, all they can do is say, we'll assume those people are like all the other people. But if we can tell them, well, actually, no, we only use your service for this specific subset of features. If we ever try to use one of these features, it's not us. You should have an alert on that, or a firewall blocking that, or whatever. So you're always engaging, and they're going to tell you, we've had 5 clients who had this horrible thing happen. If you don't want you to be number 6, you should do this, right? So you have to have that channel of communication. And then the other thing is you must be approachable, because what you really, 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 really want is that people are not afraid to say, hey, we're thinking of doing anything we should think about.
Yeah.
And you want that before vast amounts of money are spent, before everyone has finalized the design, before resources are being committed. Right. Yeah. Hearts, resources set on it, right? The earlier people feel comfortable asking for your advice, the better off you'll be. And you can't force that on people. That is about being open and friendly. And above all, you come into the conversation with the question, and I always think of you, what's the problem to be solved? And I use those words every single time. Because if they think that I'm there to say no instead of, okay, we can solve that, you want to solve your problem X way, you should solve it Y way, but we will solve your problem. That's a much easier conversation to have. Solve your problem different versus, oh no, right? You're not welcome back a second time if your answer is just
I was going
no.
to say, they invite Bart to the party because if you ask that question, right? He's like, no, let's figure out how we can solve this. But let me make sure I understand the problem first before I give you a solution.
I never go into a meeting, I never say anything for at least the first half of the first meeting, other than questions. So I am a sponge of information for the first half of the meeting. And only then do I speak. And that way I get invited back, because they're not like, oh, he's not here to tell us what to do. He's here to help. And you have to take that approach.
Yeah, I can imagine that works a lot better.
Yeah.
So that works. That's good to know.
I mean, I'm not sure it works all the time. I don't know what I'm not invited to, but I do know I'm invited to a lot of things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's really, really interesting, Bart. I like this. I like this approach of looking through each one of these pieces. When I looked at this list, I wondered about one other thing. In my experience, and again, totally different kind of company a long time ago, and hopefully it's gotten a little bit better. There was always a point where there was a risk analysis and and the way the risk analysis worked in our company anyway was you look at what's the bad thing that could happen, and the other axis was what's the probability that it will happen. So, lose all of our money, but it's a 0.0001% chance that would happen, or, lose this incredibly important security thing, but what's the probability of that? And then it was usually taken out of the hands of the security people because somebody was going to make a financial decision. And it was often the security specialist job would be to try to convince them that this is a bad enough threat that I think it's worth spending the money, even though this is going to be a bunch of money to fix this problem. Do you ever get involved in that part of the process?
Tangentially, because then the last word of your job title is very meaningful in the public sector in Ireland. So if you're a specialist, it means you are technical, not managerial. Then the next level up from a specialist is a manager, then a head, and then a chief ... And so the money decisions rest at the head and chief level, and the manager's job is to argue with the heads and the chiefs. And the specialist's job is to provide the facts for the manager to be able to have the conversation. So I have to provide the facts.
You have to give those two axes, though. You have to give those facts of what do I think the chances this could happen?
Yes.
And what is it going to cost it, or what is the effort that needs to go into to resolve or keep this from happening?
Absolutely. And I don't only get to say what the risk is, I have to be able to say why I say that. I can't just say, that's a 50-50 chance. I'm afraid I got to back it up a little bit and actually justify that number. So I got to justify the risk, and I got to justify the potential damage. And a lot of the times it kind of comes about of saying, well, okay, this has happened 5 times in the last year. Each time it had this effect. There is a product available which costs this amount that is an order of magnitude less, and it would make this not happen again.
Right.
Those kind of things. And the facts are based on, well, okay, so the measure, right, that measure and check, that is the input to those conversations. And they happen, obviously, above my pay grade.
Yeah, I think where I was more in the fighting about the money part. And I was getting the facts from people who at that time were not officially cybersecurity specialists, because I don't even think the title had been invented yet. I'm so old. Pretty soon my stories will be like talking about a spinning wheel, you know.
But I'm kind of like I'm like a security sysadmin, right? So like a sysadmin is a specialist of servery stuff, whereas I'm a specialist of the cybersecurity stuff. And so in the same way that a sysadmin probably isn't going straight to the people with the purses, the cybersecurity specialist isn't going straight to the budget holders.
Right. Well, I think this is really cool that you did this for us, but even more to do it for young people to understand what's out there. And I think that's a pretty nifty system that you had the opportunity to do this. So thanks for coming on the show and doing this. This was, you sounded perfectly lucid to me, sentence to sentence, Bart. I think you're fine. Maybe not programming by stealth fine, but definitely for this.
No, I got to weave a whole thing together fine for that one. I did actually try to have the conversation explaining submodules to my darling beloved, and it didn't go well. If I can't explain it to my darling beloved, I can't explain it to the audience, trust me.
That's for sure. All right, well, I think your security bits sign-off might be the right one to go with.
I think you're probably right. Until next time, remember to stay patched so you stay secure.
Well, that is going to wind us up for this week. Did you know you can email me at allison@podfeed.com anytime you like? I had a friend of mine who'd listened to the show for years ask me, what's your email address for the podcast? Really? I say it at the end of every single show, allison@podfeed.com. That's pretty easy. If you have a question or suggestion, just send it on over through an email. But remember, everything good starts with podfeed.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at podfeed.com/Mastodon. If you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, where do you go? podfeed.com/YouTube. If you want to join the conversation, you can join our Slack community like physics nerd Graeme told you to do over at podfeed.com/Slack. You can support the show at podfeed.com/Patreon or with a one-time donation at podfeed.com/donate or podfeed.com/PayPal. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, what are you going to do? You're going to wait for 2 weeks and then head on over to podfeed.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic NoSilicastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.